Hello, my name is Heather Scroggins, and this is my peer support research presentation for my Students with Profound to Moderate Disabilities class for Arkansas State University. The purpose of this video is to share the research I did on peer support programs for students with severe disabilities and to share kind of the importance of that and kind of an overall summary of what I found. So I did a lot of research on this. There was a lot of material out there that discussed peer relationships with students with severe disabilities. The one commonality I found between all of them is that students with severe disabilities are students who need peer relationships the most, and they're the ones that struggle the most to have those. It is due to lots of different factors, the severity of their disability, communication ability with others, sensory needs of some students. So there's lots of factors that play a role in that. On the same token, students without disabilities have lots of difficulty forming relationships with students who do have disabilities, not because they don't want to. Typically, it's because they don't understand the disability the student has. They don't know how to interact with that student. And sometimes it's fear. It's not fear of the student themselves. It's fear of not knowing what they're supposed to do. It's fear of not understanding. It's a fear that they're going to do something wrong or maybe do something that might offend the student and not mean to. So in saying that, when we talk about peer relationships with students with severe disabilities and students without disabilities, that natural occurrence that happens with students typically, it's not there. And typically it's because on this side we don't have the skills we need to do it. And on this side, we don't have the understanding to be able to do it. So that's where peer support interventions and things like it come into play. As educators, it is our job to bridge that gap that students have. We want to create situations where those peer relationships can develop, but they're not able to develop on their own. I read over several different articles by Eric Carter and a really good program that I found out there called Autism Ambassadors, and they all relatively said the same thing. We're looking at peer support groups that are designated there to make those social skills and connections that students with disabilities can't do on their own or they can't initiate on their own. It's not true of all students with severe disabilities. We have a student in my building that is the most social kid you'll ever meet. His issue is not making the relationships. His issue is knowing the appropriate things to do and not to do in a relationship. So it kind of works different ways. I looked at two research studies when I did this, and both of them showed how much of an impact peer support groups have. But before we talk about those, I want to kind of give you more of a statement of what a peer support plan is and kind of two different strategies to that. So peer support groups are when educators find students who will interact socially with students with disabilities. And this is just not in the inclusive classroom. So a lot of times we feel like, okay, we're sending little Johnny into Miss Scroggins' class for social studies. We've now included him. He'll get his social skills, everything like that. But the relationships that little Johnny has made, they're academic only. Okay, I would put him next to a student that I knew could support him, that would help him with tasks. His paraprofessional is in there, and she pretty much is helping all the time. Johnny's got an understanding now of who he can ask for help from, but when he leaves, the relationship stays in the classroom. And so that's not a peer relationship. That is an academic relationship. That's all that is. So when you look at peer support and peer relationships, you want to build friendships, and those are things that are outside of the classroom. They're outside of the school. And so that's kind of where these interventions come into place. So educators will find students who have an interest in the student with disabilities. They've expressed that interest to you. They've asked you questions about them. They have this desire to help them and to help them be part of it. These are not always your academically high kids. A lot of times, those lower academic kids, they benefit from this because they're struggling too, and all they see is people who don't struggle. And so this kind of helps them. It kind of gives them that confidence. They can learn together. And so, but when you select your students, one thing to keep in mind is you do want your students with disabilities to have a little bit of a say in this. You want to introduce them and say, hey, Johnny, this is Bob. I'm terrible at making up fake names, by the way. And Bob wants to, this is Bob. Do we like Bob? Because if Johnny doesn't like Bob, we don't want Bob to be in Johnny's peer support plan because it's not going to work. And kids with severe disabilities, they're like any other kid. They like some people, they don't like some people. Any 14-year-old girl, and I know this from direct experience, disability or not disability, they have an attitude. It's just part of growing up. It's part of who it is. So you want to make sure that those students have a say in what they're doing. So you establish this group, and then you give this group of students the background knowledge that they need. Okay, you tell them about the disability, you tell them about kind of the situation and things to do and things to avoid. If you have a student with severe disabilities who has autism and they can get overstimulated easily, you don't want that student to say, hey, come sit in the middle of this huge crowded lunchroom with me at lunch today, and that child not be able to really benefit from that because they're in sensory overload. So you meet with those students, you kind of set up this peer support plan, you look at the needs of the student, you look at kind of the parameters of their disability, and you set that plan into motion. And it's not just within the classroom. Yes, they're together in the classroom, but you initiate interactions outside of the classroom. When you're in the hallway, you stop and you say, hey, Johnny, how are you today? Give them a hug, high five, a fist bump. Fist bumps are big right now. It's all about the fist bump. You can dab. That's what my children do. They dab all the time. Do those things. Make them feel included. In the lunchroom, we have a morning assembly. And one thing I noticed, and I never really paid attention to it until I did this, was that our self-contained kids all sit in this one area during our morning assembly. And I'm like, why? They're just sitting there. They're just listening. They enjoy it. There's usually something going on. I know we have some students with really severe issues that are medically fragile, and I understand that. But they don't have to be isolated. Mix and mingle. So, you can take them and have them sit with you, and you introduce them to your friends, and they become part of that group. So you're building these relationships with students outside of the classroom, this social stuff. And for those students that have difficulties in social situations, or they have difficulties staying seated and things like that, when they're with a group of peers, those peers are modeling those supports for them. So that's kind of what you want. So that's like a peer support plan. The teachers evaluate that. The paraprofessionals can monitor it. They can say, okay, these things are working. We had this happen. How do we adjust? We can meet back with the students who are the peer support students and modify and adjust. It's kind of like any sort of intervention plan you have. You've got to track it. You've got to, record data and everything like that. But in the two studies that I did look at, some of these social interactions were instant. I mean, it was like, oh, I don't need my paraprofessional because I've got this person here who can help me. And kids want to be with kids. They don't need mom over here with them all the time. And let's just be honest, when you're a paraprofessional, you feel like you're their mother because that's your job. You're there to make sure they get what they need and everything. But I know my 9-year-old ignores me all the time. He's like, please don't talk to me. Okay, it's not any different for kids with disabilities. It's just that they don't know how to express that sometimes. So we have this model. And I looked at other ones because we do have students who have severe disabilities, and these are disabilities that they do require adults with them. We have students with tracheostomies that, you have to be aware if this is blocked and things like that. So there does have to be an adult present. So one thing we could do, and I actually saw students do this, and I was really amazed when I saw it. I never kind of made the connection till now. And I feel bad because I've been a special education teacher for 10 years. So this course brought to light a lot of stuff that I just don't see. But we do have students that, because of their disabilities, they do need to be separated from other students. Not in the sense that you just never see them, but in the cafeteria, for instance, we have students who have a disability of autism, and they get into sensory overload. And if you've ever been in a cafeteria with 300 12-year-olds, it's not sensory friendly. It's loud. There's lots of smells. It's just, it is what it is. So yes, a student like that does need to be separate from that, but that doesn't mean they have to be isolated from everyone. And I saw this last year, and I didn't really make the connection until I was doing this project, but we had a student, and she had to sit over here. She just had some difficulties with things in the lunchroom, and there was a little girl that walked over to the table one day, and she said, "Can I sit with so-and-so?" And the special education teacher was like, "Yeah, go ahead, sit down." And then that kind of grew, and after a while, her and several of her friends every day sat over there and ate lunch with them. And it was fabulous. Nobody even had to tell her to do it. And kind of what I took from that was, one of the things I talked about was lunch grouping, because there are some students who they can't do certain things because their disability limits their ability to do that. It's not that we don't want them to, but there are just in certain cases where there are things that you just can't overcome that. But you can adjust it. You can make it where you always see that saying that says, if students can't learn the way I teach, I need to teach the way they learn. Same thing. If these students can't come sit with you in the cafeteria, you can go sit with them. So it talked about lunch grouping, and they kind of started calling themselves a lunch bunch, and that's kind of what popped up. And I think that's a universal term now because it rhymes. But they made that initiative on their own, and that student was more social. So when they went to, we call them camp classes, so it's like computer art, music, and PE, she had that relationship built with those girls. And that's kind of how it all started, was they kind of formed their own relationship with her, and they wanted her to do it. And I teach sixth graders, okay? And sixth graders, sixth graders are fun. But that's a very awkward time for children in general. Disability, no disability, 12 is hard. And it doesn't get much easier for a couple years. But, forming that relationship now, that relationship will carry on with them as they get older. And as they get older, things get harder. And it's because, some kids are mean. And a lot of times it's not because they want to be mean. They're mean out of fear. Or they're mean out of insecurity or something like that. So building the relationships this young is a great thing. So how this impacts our students with disabilities learning and our students with non-disabilities learning. Their peers model what we want from them. They model the behaviors, they model the social skills, they model the emotional development for their peers. And students with disabilities, that's what they want. They want to be with the other students. They want to be able to do things the other students do. And I can sit there all day long and tell them what to do, but they're not going to listen to me like they will someone that's their own age. So you see this modeling of these skills that we want our students to learn, and they're learning it from their peers. Is this always an easy thing? No. They're just like everything. There's a challenge to it, but it can develop into more things, and it could be as simple as, looking at the teacher when she's talking. If they're sitting there by each other and your peer support student is sitting there looking, and this one, Johnny's over here like doing something, the peer's going to be like, "Hey, let's watch her and listen." Well, he's doing it. Johnny's going to do it because Johnny wants to do it. And it's just great. And you can see that happen. It's fabulous. So, That's our social skills. And academic wise, if, again, with making up fake names, I should have wrote these down before I ever started talking. Bob, Bob doesn't turn in his work. Bob forgets it. Bob forgets to turn it in. He walks out without it. You've got that peer support partner there, and they're like, hey, Bob, let's go turn in our work. That's all it took. That's it. And in that time, they have built a relationship. Bob trusts, this friend he's made, and they go do it. And eventually Bob does it by himself. And so that's kind of the ultimate goal overall with your peer relationships is we want friendships. We want to build these friendships with students that will carry with them. And these are people that it's not just in the classroom, it's in the hallways, it's at lunch, it's during, activities, it's during assemblies, it's outside of the school. And that's part of that peer support plan. It's what activities can I invite them to come. And as you get older, that gets a little easier because you have sporting events and things like that. But all of that is predetermined in the setup. It's all about, okay, these are things they can do. These are places they can go. And, usually parents are on board to do this for their children because nothing breaks your heart more than when your kids say, I don't have any friends. And I know this. I'm a mom. I have a 9-year-old who has severe ADHD and impulse issues and social skills, and it breaks your heart. But he has a peer support plan that I didn't realize was a peer support plan, but he is intentionally placed in classrooms with certain kids because they help him, and they've helped him for the last 2 years, and it's fabulous. And I didn't realize that's what it was because I didn't realize that. I know I ramble, and I try not to, but I've been a special education teacher for 10 years. I have a very special place in my heart for them. And I have since I was a kid. I was part of the Partners Club in high school, and I had a very special relationship with a student who I still see every day because she still lives where I am, and I know where she is, and I just happen to see her like pretty much every day. But we have that relationship, and we met 17 years ago, but we formed that relationship. So kind of thoughts for the future on this. So like I said, I've been an special educator for 10 years, and a lot of this, it was like aha moments in my life. It wasn't that I didn't know that I was doing it. It was that I didn't know what it was I was doing. So I mentioned that I was in Partners Club, and we have that here, and that is a peer support group. That's exactly what it is. They are there, and they help our athletes during Special Olympics. They, talk to them in the hallways. They include them when we have football games. They ask them to sit with them in the student section, and they're kind of responsible for them and making sure nothing happens to them. And it was great. I loved that. I was in it through all of high school. I was the president of it my senior year, and it was great. And I kind of feel like that contributes a lot to how I ended up in special education. But it doesn't start until high school. And so my thought while I was doing this was why? Why do we wait till high school to start this? I teach in a middle school. I teach 6th graders. I can understand elementary schools are a little different. We're still trying to learn how to walk down the hallway. But by the time we get to 6th grade, this is where we are trying to figure out who we are. Okay, we don't know who we are in 6th grade. Let me tell you, they don't know who they are. Why not create something that can help them, that can help build the relationships with these students with disabilities who are going to be with them through high school? And we have this little block of time every Friday where we can have clubs, I guess that's what we're calling it. And I'm going to go to my principals today, actually, when I get done with this video, and discuss with them about starting a Partners Club in the middle school. Build the relationships now. Help these students to, one, learn compassion and empathy and understanding in your non-disabled students, which is something that is really hard when you're in the 6th grade. It's hard to not want to go with the group. It's hard to do those things. But if you build that up from this level, it'll just carry with them. And then you've got your students with severe disabilities, with moderate disabilities. And they're in the same struggle. They're trying to figure out who they are. They have all these obstacles in their way. This is the year where friends stop being friends. It's a big thing. But why not create that now? Why not create those peer support groups now for them to carry with them to the future, and it'll just build. And think of the relationships that students will make. Maybe it won't be the best relationship starting out in 6th grade. Like I said, they're 6th graders, but why not? Why not start it then? You're together in 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th until you graduate. And you can think, if you started it today, what the relationship looks like 6 years from now. So that's kind of how I feel about this. I'm not even really sure if I did this right, but I'm kind of a little bit passionate about it, so you have to deal with me. But the research is there. Okay, the research is there. There are numerous studies on this and how it works. And it's not just beneficial for our students with disabilities, it is beneficial for our students without them. They have a better understanding of students with disabilities. They have a better understanding of how to just love people, and they understand we're all different. And that's kind of a big deal at that age. It's different scares us. We don't understand it. We don't want to go against what everybody else is doing. But when you create an environment where that's okay, then that's kind of what you're going to get. I'd put in my paper about this, about peer pressure, and I had read it in an article that was about this group called Autism Ambassadors, and it talked about, what if peer pressure was a good thing? What if you created these groups and these students who were in it, the peer pressure there is to be accepting and to invite them in and to build those friendships. That's kind of peer pressure we want. We don't want this, oh, why are you doing that? We want this, why aren't you doing this? And it's a great tool to have. So kind of summarize everything. Peer relationships are vital to anybody. They are vital to students with disabilities. They are vital to students without disabilities. They are vital to adults. Okay, we have to have peer relationships. They teach us things. They build our social skills. They build our emotional skills. They help us academically. I have relationships with people because they help me. They know more than I know. They show me how to do things, and I appreciate that from them. So these relationships they're just so vital. And when you have kids who cannot communicate or who don't know how to interact with others, you have to step in and help bridge that gap. As I stated before, there are some students who they have no issues with their socials. Their social game is good. Okay, they know how to interact. They want to interact. Sometimes, we got to say, hey, okay, take about 2 steps back. But that's good. But then you have ones who don't. So kind of the overarching theme here is peer supports are what is going to help bridge that gap for our students. Establishing programs, finding students who have that heart in them to want to help other students, and you're going to see such a transformation in your students' behavior, in your students' academics, in their social skills. It'll be a huge, huge improvement. And I'm very excited what this has done for me as far as looking at how things are done where I teach now and the possibilities of what could be done. So I hope you have a great day and happy teaching, everyone.